It was the shock news of overnight here in Europe. Julian Assange reaching a deal with U.S. authorities not to be extradited. He is, after transiting in Bangkok, is en route from the UK to the North Mariana Islands, a U.S. dependency in the Pacific, where the WikiLeaks founder is to enter one guilty plea on a guilty plea on one count of leaking classified documents. He'll then be sentenced for time already served and will be free to return to his native Australia.
In this footage released by WikiLeaks, Julian Assange is shown holding a document before boarding a plane at what it says is London's Stansted Airport. It comes as Assange reached a landmark plea deal with the United States after fighting extradition for nearly 14 years. The 52-year-old has agreed to plead guilty to a single count of conspiracy to obtain and disseminate national defense information. He's not expected to face any prison time due to the 5 years and 2 months he's already served in the UK. Assange is set to submit his plea on Wednesday in Saipan, part of the Northern Mariana Islands, a US Commonwealth. He declined to travel to the US mainland for proceedings, and Saipan is closer to his home country, Australia, where, according to court documents, he'll return afterwards. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese welcomed the development, though noted the proceedings were crucial and delicate.
Regardless of the views that people have about Mr Assange's activities, the case has dragged on for too long. There is nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia.
Assange's legal woes began in 2010 when WikiLeaks, the platform he founded, published a video of a US helicopter strike in Baghdad that killed civilians and journalists, as well as incident logs from the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. He was originally charged on 18 counts of conspiring to obtain classified information, which carried a maximum penalty of 175 years in prison.
And for more, we're joined by France 24's Philip Turrell. Philip, there had been charges for 13 and a half years hanging over the head of Julian Assange. This request to be extradited, it all seemed to end kind of suddenly.
It's like a coming together of the stars, I think, François. You've got three countries involved in this. You have the United States, which is basically the country pushing the charges that wanted Julian Assange extradited and wanted to put him in prison, 175 years in total for the crimes that he committed. Then you have Australia, which is his birth country, of which he is a national, which has been pushing for him to return home and to get him released. And then you have the United Kingdom, which is where Julian Assange happened to be at the time, and where he's been serving this prison sentence for the last 1,901 days. Remember, he was also holed up in the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, for years before that, from 2012 to 2019. And before that, he was remanded in custody on rape charges because he was wanted by the authorities in Sweden. So this is really the end of a very long judicial saga. And as one of the lawyers we've been talking to here at France 24 this afternoon said, this is probably the longest running extradition case in UK legal history.
Well, for more on that, we can now cross to Sydney, Australia, where it is late into the night. Andrew Fowler, investigative reporter, the author of The Most Dangerous Man in the World, squarely about all that's happened in this saga. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
My pleasure, François.
Julian Assange, your first reaction when you saw that it all was suddenly coming together?
Well, to say I was surprised would be an understatement. Nobody was expecting it to be this quick, and nobody was expecting it to be, of all places, via the Marianas. Wherever that was, we sent us scrambling for our maps to find out why he was going there and why it would all be over in one day, apparently, a one-day sitting. I know that Assange was very keen not to go to the continental United States, but the question was, why this offshore part of the United States? There must be some legal avenue there that makes Assange feel safer and less likely to be snatched on his way through back to Australia.
What happened? What do you think made that this impasse was suddenly resolved?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think the major consideration was that Joe Biden was fearing a move in from the libertarian right, from the Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, the libertarian, who would be drawing votes away from his base. And so settling this issue was really important because Kennedy had said that he would pardon Assange if he were to be elected. Now, not much chance of him being elected, but chances of him drawing votes away from Biden, which Biden at the moment can really not want to lose. So that, I think, would be one of the major considerations. There's also a question of really at this end, the Americans are rather problem with a deal that people in France will probably know about, which is the nuclear submarine deal, in which Australia dumped France and went to America. Now, the Americans are being a little sort of tardy in promising to deliver up the submarines they promised. So there's a bit of anti-American, a bit of antipathy going on. So these things come together, and I think that's the sort of fix. But the main thing is, of course, is that Biden was worried about losing votes to Kennedy.
You stated on the social medium formerly known as Twitter that there's still the problem of extraterritoriality, the fact that the U.S. has a long arm.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even though Julian Assange will hopefully be free, and we never know until he actually steps down here on terra firma in Australia. But the question of the long reach of the American arm of the law is one that should trouble all journalists, because Assange, by doing this plea deal, if that's what happens later on today, on Wednesday, if that happens, it will mean that the Americans can reach out around the world and arrest or arrange for the arrest of any journalist who publishes material that they claim is theirs or that causes trouble for their national security. So it's a win for Assange, and I think it's a win for humanity, quite frankly, but it's a bit of a loss for investigative journalism.
There's been a lot that's changed in 13 and a half years, particularly when you have these kinds of data dumps now. There have been lessons learned, you think? Well, I think there have been, when I say lessons learned, I think people have been scared out of their wits. I think the problem is that the backlash against what Assange did has been so strong. I mean, we jailed whistleblowers here in Australia. This hasn't happened before. I mean, well, it has, but not to the extent and not to the numbers of people that have been prosecuted or taken through the courts, and then at the last moment the case has been withdrawn. But there's an element of fear in the public service and in the areas where investigative journalists normally draw their information from that has shut down a lot of sources. So it makes it very, very hard for people to talk to journalists and for journalists to do their work. So but wasn't there an element, though, of recklessness at times? If you just dump raw data, you do put people's lives at risk? Well, there's no suggestion that Assange dumped raw data. There's some suggestions that there were problems with the Afghan war logs. But when push comes to shove and you look at all the hysterical headlines about people being killed and all the nonsense that came from Hillary Clinton, you go through the detail, nobody has been killed as a result of the WikiLeaks revelations, the so-called dump. And how do we know that? Because during Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning's trial, the person that leaked the documents, the Pentagon investigated this very issue, and they came up to the conclusion that nobody had been killed at all as a result of WikiLeaks. So you can kind of lay that one to rest, and it always raises its head. Andrew Fowler, have you been able to speak with Julian Assange in the last 24 hours? No, I haven't, but I've been tracking his plane coming through Bangkok and on his way out to the Marianas. And I think that tomorrow or the next day when he arrives, there'll be quite a large celebratory reception for him at Sydney Airport, if that's where he comes into. I mean, he's had to actually hire a private jet, so I read, at a cost of 500,000 Australian dollars to do that. So he's going to be kind of out of pocket, and they're really trying to raise funds, but he'll be coming in, I would have thought, to a pretty lively and warm reception from the majority of Australian people who want him to come home. A majority of Australian people, I was going to ask you, what is the general sentiment in Australia, not just those who are going to the airport?
general sentiment, well, according to opinion polls, about 80% of the Australian population want him home. And what's interesting, or what many things are interesting about this case, is that people really want him to come home, and it's not just the political left or even the political centre, it's the right as well. It's libertarian right. And so you've got a cross-party, and in fact a parliamentary cross-party group of people that have been campaigning strongly for Assange over the last few years. So it's not just, it's just about an Australian identity, if you like, and how Australians feel about how they've been treated by the British and by the Americans.
Andrew Fowler, so many thanks for burning the midnight oil and speaking with us here at France 24 from Sydney.
My pleasure, François.
I want to thank as well Philip Turrell for being with us from our International Affairs Desk.